My name is Annette Herfkens, and believe me, my story is stomach-churning. Think of all the worst days of your life and multiply by 1,000. Now imagine yourself in the middle of a Vietnamese jungle with 12 broken bones, a dislocated jaw, and a collapsed lung. Before I recount the accident, I want you to know a bit about me. I was born in the Netherlands and worked for many years as a banker, a demanding career, especially for a woman at that time. From an early age, I was always very determined and focused on my goals. My banking career took me to various countries, allowing me to live unique and challenging experiences. I was in a long-term romantic relationship with Willem Paasje van der Pas, my fiancé and companion in many adventures. Paasje was the type of person who lit up any room with his smile. We shared a passion for exploring the world and lived a life full of travels and discoveries. He was my confidant, my best friend, and the love of my life. Our relationship was a perfect blend of love and partnership. Together, we faced challenges and celebrated achievements, always supporting each other. Paasje always had a surprise up his sleeve, and that's how, after a few weeks apart due to work, he surprised me with a trip to Nha Trang, a paradise destination in Vietnam. Little did I know this surprise would change our lives forever. The day before the accident. It was a typical morning in Ho Chi Minh City, hot and humid with the sun shining brightly over the vibrant city. Paasje and I were thrilled to reunite after a few weeks apart. The air was filled with sounds, the incessant hum of motorcycles, the laughter of children playing in the streets, and the distant calls of street vendors. The city was a fascinating mix of tradition and modernity. We strolled through the Ben Thanh market, where the vivid colors of tropical fruits and the exotic aromas of spices created a sensory symphony. Paasje held my hand firmly, his ever-present smile reflecting the joy of our reunion. He was excited and full of energy, constantly surprising me with small displays of affection and care. After a delicious breakfast at a local cafe, where we savored the famous Vietnamese coffee with condensed milk, Paasje revealed his surprise: a 5-day romantic trip to Nha Trang, a paradise destination on Vietnam's coast. His eyes sparkled with excitement as he described the white sandy beaches and crystal-clear waters awaiting us. We spent the day exploring the city, visiting the Notre Dame Cathedral Basilica of Saigon and the Central Post Office, historic buildings that reflect French colonial influence. Everywhere we went, Paasje's presence made everything more special. His curiosity and enthusiasm were contagious, and I felt grateful for every moment by his side. As the afternoon approached, we decided to relax in Tao Dan Park, a green oasis in the heart of the city. Sitting under the shade of an old tree, we talked about our plans and dreams for the future. We laughed, made plans, and simply enjoyed each other's company. We ended the day with a romantic dinner at a riverside restaurant on the Saigon River, where we enjoyed traditional Vietnamese dishes while the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The atmosphere was magical, and I felt incredibly happy and connected with Paasje. Unaware of what was to come, we said goodbye to the night with the expectation of a new adventure together. We were about to embark on a trip that promised to be unforgettable, not knowing it would change our lives forever. The fateful flight. On November 14, 1992, the sun was just rising as Paasje and I arrived at the bustling Ho Chi Minh City airport. The airport was packed with travelers, each with their own destinations and stories. Among them were us, anxious and excited for our romantic trip to Nha Trang. With tickets in hand, we passed through security and headed to the boarding gate, where our Vietnam Airlines Flight 474 awaited us. As we approached the plane, a sense of unease washed over me. The Yakovlev Yak-40, an old Soviet aircraft, looked small and worn with age. The windows were narrow, and the fuselage showed visible signs of wear. I tried to ignore my gut feeling, but I couldn't shake off the growing apprehension. Sensing my unease, Paasje squeezed my hand and reassured me with his confident smile. Upon boarding, the feeling of claustrophobia intensified. The cabin was cramped, with old cushioned seats that had seen better days. The air inside the plane was stuffy and had a faint smell of dampness and fuel. The other passengers, many of them Vietnamese, were settling into their seats, while the flight attendants made final preparations for takeoff. Once we settled into our seats, the plane began taxiing down the runway. Pasha and I chatted excitedly about our plans for Nha Trang, trying to ignore the discomfort around us. The plane accelerated, and with a roar of the engines, it took off. The initial feeling of relief at being airborne soon dissipated, replaced by growing concern as the plane climbed unsteadily. About 50 minutes after takeoff, the sky was covered in dense, dark clouds. The plane began encountering severe turbulence, shaking violently from side to side. The sound of the engines grew louder and more strained, as if they were being overworked. The lights inside the cabin flickered, heightening the sense of panic among the passengers. The flight attendants tried to remain calm, but fear was evident on their faces. Some passengers began praying, while others clutched the armrests tightly. Pasha and I exchanged worried glances, and he reached out to hold my hand. The plane continued to rock uncontrollably, and I felt my heart race with adrenaline. Suddenly there was a massive jolt, as if the plane had been yanked downward. The force of the impact threw me against the seat, and I could hear the sound of objects falling and people screaming. The plane began losing altitude rapidly, and panic took over the cabin. I looked at Pasha, who tried to comfort me with a determined look, but I also saw the fear in his eyes. The sound of the engines grew even louder, almost deafening, and I felt a chill down my spine as I realized we were falling. Everything happened in a matter of seconds, but it felt like an eternity. The passengers' screams and the noise of twisting metal merged into a terrifying chaos. And then, everything went dark. A final brutal impact, and absolute silence. The sensation of being violently tossed around ceased, replaced by a dark void. There were no more screams, no engine noise. The impact and brutal reality. When I regained consciousness, I was in the middle of the Vietnamese jungle. Around me, the scene was one of complete chaos and devastation. The wreckage of the plane was scattered everywhere, mixed with the dense jungle vegetation. The first thing I noticed was the eerie silence, broken only by the distant sounds of wildlife. In contrast to the deafening noise of the crash, that silence was almost deafening in itself. I looked around and saw lifeless bodies among the wreckage. Some still strapped to their seats, others strewn across the jungle floor. The smell of fuel and crushed vegetation mingled in the air, creating a nauseating aroma. My eyes finally found Pasha. He was nearby, his body partially covered by fragments of the plane. His face, despite death, still displayed a serene smile, as if he was at peace. Seeing him there, lifeless, hit me with a wave of pain and despair I never thought possible. I tried to move, but a sharp pain shot through my body. The pain was nearly unbearable, each movement sending a new wave of agony. I was severely injured, 12 broken bones, including my pelvis and leg. My jaw was loose and one of my lungs had collapsed. My fingers were covered in dried blood, and I could feel the swelling in my feet, which had doubled in size. Each breath sent a searing pain through my chest. My dislocated jaw made it difficult to speak, even to scream for help. The vegetation around me seemed to close in, turning the environment into a green, suffocating prison. Each attempt to move was a monumental effort, and the reality of my situation began to sink in. The feeling of isolation was overwhelming. The jungle, with its dense vegetation and sounds of wildlife, seemed indifferent to my pain and despair. Hours dragged on, and I was overwhelmed by a combination of shock, pain, and a sense of unreality. There were no signs of rescue, no human voices, just the constant murmur of the jungle around me. As time passed, I began to take stock of my immediate surroundings. The bodies around me were a constant reminder of the tragedy that had occurred. Some people seemed to have survived the initial impact, but succumbed to their injuries or exposure shortly after. I was alone, in a hostile environment, injured and unsure if anyone would come to rescue me. The sight of Pasha, the pain from my injuries and the uncertainty of the future created a storm of emotions within me. Tears of despair mixed with the sweat and blood on my face. The physical pain was constant, but the emotional pain of losing Pasha and being alone in that unknown place was almost unbearable. I knew I needed to survive, not just for myself, but to honor Pasha's memory. Every painful breath, every attempt to move, was a step toward that determination. The jungle was relentless, but I was determined to find a way to endure, to find hope amidst absolute despair. In the days following the crash, My life became a constant struggle for survival. The Vietnamese jungle around me was both stunning and relentless, a dense, lush landscape that seemed indifferent to my suffering. Tall trees with thick canopies blocked most of the sunlight, creating a dark and humid environment. The air was heavy with the smell of vegetation and the constant sound of insects and distant animals. Every movement was a battle against pain. With 12 broken bones, including my pelvis and leg, a loose jaw, and a collapsed lung, even the simplest tasks required monumental effort. My first priority was to find a way to get drinking water. I made a painful journey to the plane's wing, moving inch by inch to get the insulation material. I knew this material could be used to collect rainwater, which fell sporadically, providing the hydration necessary for my survival. Every drop of water was precious. I used pieces of metal from the plane to create small containers, positioning them to capture rainwater. During the day, I anxiously watched the sky, hoping for clouds that would bring life-saving rain. When it finally rained, the water collected in the improvised containers was a blessing, a temporary relief amidst the constant struggle. To keep calm and mentally clear, I relied on the breathing techniques I learned in yoga. I closed my eyes and focused on each slow, deep breath, trying to ignore the pain radiating from my injuries. I visualized calm and peace, imagining I was in a safe and comfortable place, far from the jungle and the tragedy. Meditation became an essential tool for dealing with despair and loneliness. Hunger was a constant and debilitating presence. There was nothing around me to eat. The jungle, though full of life, seemed to offer nothing that could sustain me. My mind wandered to stories of survivors in extreme situations, and I refused to consider the darker options. The memory of Passier, with his serene smile at the moment of death, gave me strength to continue. I knew I needed to survive, not just for myself, but to honor his memory. Every day, my routine was the same. I checked the water containers, made small adjustments to optimize collection, and tried to move my aching body as little as possible to conserve energy. The days dragged on, each as endless as the last. Pain was a constant companion, a relentless presence that I had to endure every second. The jungle around me was a paradox of beauty and danger. The dense vegetation offered some protection from the elements, but also harbored insects that bit my skin and small animals whose noises kept me constantly alert. The sounds of the jungle were both comforting and frightening, a constant reminder that I was alone in a hostile environment. The loneliness was overwhelming. The bodies around me, now in an advanced state of decomposition, were a constant reminder of the fragility of life. Nights were especially difficult. Without daylight, the darkness seemed to swallow everything, and the sounds of the jungle became more intense and threatening. I curled up, trying to find some comfort and security, and focused my mind on positive thoughts to ward off fear. With each dawn, the faint light filtered through the treetops, bringing new hope of rescue. I kept the faith that someone would come to find me, that somehow I would be saved from this nightmare. Each passing day was a victory, a testament to my resilience and determination to survive against all odds. On the 8th day, the sun began to penetrate through the dense tree canopies, casting diffuse shadows in the clearing where I lay. Weakness had become my constant companion, and hope was beginning to wane, replaced by a resigned acceptance of my situation. My thoughts moved slowly, matching the painful rhythm of my breaths. Suddenly, I heard a sound that stood out from the usual murmur of the jungle. It was a human sound, cautious footsteps breaking branches and dry leaves. I tried to lift my head, but the pain and weakness kept me on the ground. The steps drew closer, and soon I saw the figure of a man dressed in a Vietnamese police uniform. His eyes widened when he saw me, and he took a step back, clearly frightened. I must have looked like a specter, a nearly unreal being in that environment. My body was covered in dirt and dried blood, and my clothes were in tatters. He murmured something in Vietnamese, his voice trembling. Later, I learned that he thought I was a ghost, as he had never seen a white woman before, especially in such a desperate condition. With tremendous effort, I managed to raise my hand and make a weak gesture, trying to show that I was real and needed help. The policeman stepped back a few more paces before finally approaching cautiously. He spoke to me in Vietnamese, and although I couldn't understand his words, the tone of his voice and his expression showed concern. After a few minutes of hesitation, the policeman turned and began calling for others. I heard more voices in the distance, and soon more men appeared. They examined the area, the wreckage of the plane, and then focused on me. With gentle yet firm movements, they lifted me from the ground. The pain was excruciating. Every movement seemed to aggravate my injuries, but I was being rescued. The men placed me on an improvised stretcher made from a tarp stretched between two branches. They took turns carrying me through the dense jungle, each step a combination of relief and torment. The journey through the forest seemed endless. The sounds of the jungle blended with the murmurs of the men and the constant rustling of vegetation being pushed aside. Finally, after what seemed like hours, we reached a more open area where a vehicle was waiting for us. I was carefully placed in the back and taken to a local hospital. The journey there was a blur of pain and exhaustion. The vehicle's movements, however gentle, sent waves of agony through my injured body. At the hospital, a medical team rushed to attend to me. The sterile, brightly lit environment was a stark contrast to the days spent in the jungle. Doctors and nurses talked among themselves, assessing my injuries and beginning emergency care. I felt the sting of needles and the pressure of bandages, but above all I felt profound relief. The road to recovery was long and painful. The doctors diagnosed my injuries: 12 broken bones, including my pelvis and leg, a dislocated jaw, and a collapsed lung. I underwent several surgeries to repair the damage and spent weeks in the hospital, where I received constant care. Each day was a new challenge: learning to walk again, dealing with persistent pain, and facing the loss of Pasha. But despite everything, I survived. The memory of those days in the jungle, the fight for survival, and the final rescue remained etched in me forever, a constant reminder of the strength and resilience I never knew I possessed. After the accident, my life changed completely in ways I could never have predicted. Physical recovery was just the beginning of a long journey of personal and emotional transformation. Returning to my normal life seemed impossible at first, but I was determined to find a new sense of purpose for my existence. After months of intense and painful rehabilitation, I finally managed to return to work. My job in banking, which had once seemed so central to my identity, was now seen in a new light. I valued each day, each task, and the interactions with my colleagues. The pain and suffering I experienced gave me an unexpected resilience and a renewed appreciation for everyday life. Eventually, I remarried a colleague who supported me during my recovery. Together, we built a family and had 2 wonderful children. However, life presented new challenges. One of my children was diagnosed with autism, a condition that brought a unique set of obstacles and learnings. I worked tirelessly to support my child, learning everything I could about autism and becoming actively involved in the community of parents of autistic children. In 2014, I decided to share my story with the world. I wrote a book titled Turbulence: A True Story of Survival, where I narrate my experience of survival and the lessons of resilience and hope I learned along the way. Writing the book was a cathartic process, allowing me to reflect on the events that changed my life and how they shaped who I am today. My story resonated with many people around the world. I received letters and messages from readers who found inspiration in my journey. Talking about my experience became a mission, and I started giving motivational speeches, sharing not only the details of the accident, but also the emotional and mental survival strategies I adopted. The tragedy I faced in 1992 continues to be a central part of who I am. Every year on the anniversary of the accident, I take time to reflect and remember Pasha and the other lives lost that day. This period of remembrance is painful, but also a moment of gratitude for the second chance I received. The experience taught me that even in the most desperate circumstances, inner strength and hope can carry us forward. I learned the importance of living in the moment, appreciating small joys, and never underestimating the human capacity to adapt and overcome. Today, I continue to honor my journey, living each day with purpose and gratitude.